Terry's right. Actually, June the 1st, I'll be celebrating 49 years in hospital facilities. I started when I was 4. Most people don't start that early. But it's been fun. A little bit more about me. I worked for Piedmont in Columbus for the last 15 years, I guess it was. But about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, I decided it was time to hang it up. So I turned my papers in to the CEO there, and I said, I'm giving you a year notice because I know it's not easy to find facility directors. And he said, yeah, you ain't going anywhere. So 6 months down the road, I saw him at a meeting, and I said, we're down to 6 months. He says, what are you talking about? And I said, I got 6 months left, then I'm leaving. He said, you're serious about this? And I said, yes, sir. I'm 66 years old, and I'm ready to go out and sit on the farm. And so he said, well, I guess we better start looking. So I had worked previously with the Piedmont system, a gentleman named Jack Tillman. Jack's pretty much up there at the top, does acquisitions, and he's the chief strategy officer for Piedmont. So I'd worked with him on some projects, helping him do some things on the facility side. So he calls me at home and he says, what's this vicious rumor I hear about you? And I said, it's not a rumor. So Jack says, well, you don't seem like the kind of guy that could just hang it up and quit. And I said, well, I'm kind of involved with some societies, and I got a lot of friends, and I've got some offers to do some part-time consulting. And he says, well, won't you do that for Piedmont? And I said, well, I didn't think that was an option. And he says, I can make it an option. So that's how it happened. So now I work for the Piedmont system. I average about 3 days a week. I said part-time. I think they think part-time's 12 hours instead of 24. But it's getting pretty good. We're getting a little bit, but we've got so much to do. What we're trying to do, I'm really supposed to support all the guys in the hospitals, help them get projects together, help them put some things in front of their administration where they may be having problems. And then the other side of it is to systemize a lot of our policies and procedures and programs. For example, we've got 24 facilities and 24 safety management plans. And you really don't need to do that. So Terry graciously agreed to chair a task force for policies and procedures. So now his group will take the 24 policies out and go through them and pick the best of the best and make one policy out of it. And then understanding that what we do at Piedmont Walton is not necessarily going to work at Piedmont Atlanta 100%. But the basis is there because you're just meeting the standards and the requirements. So that gets you there, and then we just may have addendums or additions to those things. But when the D&B comes in, which is who Piedmont uses for accreditation, they'll get familiar and look at this. Oh, we've seen this before. We like this plan. Or hopefully they say they like this plan. But that's kind of what we're doing. I've been in, 30-plus surveys over the years. And so I've seen really good surveyors and really bad surveyors and a lot of in-between. So some of the things that come up is what I'm going to talk about here. But this was something that came up. I actually put this together for our accreditation folks in Piedmont. Each Piedmont hospital has an accreditation team that works with D&V. And, we were talking yesterday about some commercials that were our favorites. And I told him one of mine was the old guy that says, stay in your lane, bro. Because certain people in hospitals like to get out of their lane and get into our lane on some things. So we found it's best if we can work with these folks, being the accreditation folks, the infection prevention folks, the risk management folks, because we can work a lot better as a team than working against each other. And sometimes that's how it ends up, the accreditation person goes to Tane and says, you need to do this. And sometimes Tane just don't want to do that because he knows that's really not the right way to do it. So one of the things that came up was the 96-hour rule. And another thing says something about the utilities, but this is the entire 96-hour rule per se program. So this is meant to be interactive. I don't want to sit up here and read slides, although I know I have to read some of it because I said about where Zach was and couldn't see any of it yesterday. So if you're not up here, it's going to be hard to see. We will turn the lights down, I guess. It makes it a little easier. But basically, what is it and where do you stand in your facility? So I hope that maybe this will help you a little bit. Let me ask you a question. Who in here knows everything about the 96-hour rule? So this might be a pretty good subject. I know you all know some about it, but what I'm going to do, this overview will take, how did it originate? Where did this thing come from? I mean, somebody brought it up, and then what is the requirement? And we'll look at 4 major players in this that you're either going to have DNV, CMS, or the Joint Commission for your accreditation. So you'll cover that. We'll talk a little bit about what ASHI thinks about it, and then key points to address for each one. Now, when I start going through this, you're going to say, it seems redundant. We already talked about that, but what it is I've taken each one of these players and put in what they think, I shouldn't say they think, what their opinion of the 96-hour rule is. I interviewed some pretty good folks, DNV contacts that I have, I sat down with, went through there. 2 Joint Commission surveyors that I'm pretty good friends with went through that. I didn't know anybody at CMS, but I just got on their website. And CMS is pretty simple when you go look at their documentation, and you'll see that when we get into that. And of course, I got plenty of contacts with ASHI. So, where do we go from here? ASHI says, designing a hospital-specific 96-hour plan counters the incorrect assumption that all healthcare facilities must remain open and operational for 96 hours in the wake of an emergency. There is no 96-hour rule that says you have to be open for 96 hours. And one of these folks that I was talking about was telling this group of folks, we got to buy this and we need to buy that because we're never going to make 96 hours. Some things, 96 hours is, you got it all the time. Other things, it could be difficult. So NFPA says, it mentions the 96 hours, doesn't direct organizations to provide 96 hours worth of inventory, only to assess their shortfalls, determine if any mitigation is necessary, the feasibility, that's a big word, of extending those different resources to get to 96 hours. It's an FPA. DNV requires organizations to comply with an FPA 99, 2012, Chapter 12. That's basically all they're saying. DNV is going to tell you that. The Joint Commission says healthcare organizations are not required to remain fully functional for 96 hours, nor are they required to stockpile supplies. They are required to develop an operational plan for a 96-hour duration and fully understand their capabilities, limitations, in order to make effective decisions under emergency conditions and organized manner. That organized manner probably seldom happens when you get into this. CMS, while CMS does have an emergency preparedness requirement, that's the State Operations Manual, Appendix Z. Terry's very familiar with this. Anybody that works through CMS is familiar with this. CMS has never nor referred to a 96-hour rule, ever, in any documentation they have. Who does DNV and the Joint Commission follow? Let's look at NFPA. The NFPA's mission is very simple. Craig, back there? Yeah, he could cite it, I'm sure. To reduce the number of deaths, injuries, and economic losses caused by fire, electricity, or related hazards. That's their mission. Today, NFPA publishes more than 300 codes, standards spanning throughout fire, life safety, and electrical. 2 codes we deal mostly with, and I'll talk about mostly, although there are some variations, is the 101 Life Safety Code and 99 the Healthcare Code. We'll talk about a lot of those. Now, pay close attention to this right here. I do have a pointer, don't I? High tech. Remember, NFPA codes are occupancy and addition specific. What does that mean? If you're in a long-term care facility, your requirements under both of these codes are different than healthcare, a hospital, medical office building. And when was it built? because when it was constructed, it's what addition you're going to refer to. There are a little bit of differences in those. That's why it's never just cut and dry and simple. Terry and I answered like 4 emails today where people are asking questions about what does this mean, what does that mean? And sometimes, I'm dashing into the codes to look at it because it's, you don't just memorize all this stuff. And it changes every 3 years. So here we go. Where did the 96-hour rule originate? Talking to all these gurus that I did, we think our best guess is the Joint Commission took NFPA 99 Healthcare Section, Chapter 12, Emergency Management 125333, which states the facility shall identify the resource capability shortfalls from 96 hours of sustainability and determine if mitigation activities are necessary and feasible. Shortfalls. I think they forgot that when it was put out. And then obviously mitigation activities that are necessary and feasible. What does that mean exactly? Well, let's take a 250-bed hospital, regular emergency room, not a trauma center. They do have a normal surgery schedule, really no specialty, a couple of subspecialties. And there know a hurricane's coming and they want to prepare for it. So they have to go back and look at their resources and determine what they've got, what they can add, and based on that, how long they can operate all these different things. So if you don't have 96 hours, let's say you have 60 hours worth of stuff. That's, 60 hours you're going to run out. Well, does that mean that you're going to evacuate the hospital in 60 hours? Hopefully not, but that could be the case. But what all this is telling you and all this information is you have to determine this. Your teams inside your hospital, under your emergency management, and of course facilities is going to be tied directly to that. You have to make that decision. Chapter 12 further, under 125334 says the facility shall establish a protocol for monitoring the quantity of assets and resources as they are utilized. Okay, so let's take medical supplies. And you determine you've got 50 hours of medical supplies. Okay, and you start using them. Well, you find out at 38, you're out. Uh-oh. Somebody on this team is going to monitor supplies. Somebody in facilities is going to monitor diesel fuel. They're going to monitor the generator setup, make sure everything's running, not overheating, checking boilers, chillers, throughout this. Each thing, the facility under 3.5 facility shall write an emergency operations plan, the EOP that we all know it as, that describes the command structure for the following critical functions. Now this is the minimum, but obviously you can have more. Number one, top one, communications. You've got to be able to communicate with everybody in this facility when this is going on. But also, you got to communicate with each other to put your plan together. Now, everybody in here has an emergency operations plan, but how far does it go into the details for 96 hours of sustainability? And Terry, I don't know how detailed some of ours are. I know some of them are pretty good, some of them.
We've gone to a point, in fact, Tang came up with a very nice sheet that we list each utility, each asset, food, how much food we have, how much water, all those things, and it's just on a spreadsheet of how many hours we can deal with it, and then.
And that's going to come in when you set this group together. And you start planning it out. It's okay, this is what, current use, this is what we use in water. But when you go to emergency, hopefully you're going to back that down and you got to determine how you do that, what you put in place to do that. And it may be that you're only stopping one service after a certain amount of hours. Maybe you shut down elective surgeries and you're only doing emergency surgeries. So that it's not like you're shutting everything down at one time.
And Mark, it's worth mentioning, back years ago, we had called business continuity plan, but at the end of that time frame, whatever it may be, you kick in your business continuity plan that says you, what am I going to do now? I can do with 2 less people. I can cut food back to 1 meal a day. I can bring all the batteries and hold on to them before somebody steals them.
Exterior connections. They're not talking about tying your water in. They're talking about who's your folks to get you more fuel, get you more medical supplies, your memorandums of understanding to different agencies. You know, back in my day, I know we said, we got an agreement with Fort Benning to supply us with all the water we want. Got it? Writing. And look at the date, this is 12 years ago. So we call out there and base commander has no clue what we're talking about. So the memorandum of understanding, you need to keep these things current. You know, I would say at least annually talking to folks and make sure the folks that are out there are the ones that you actually communicated with. Yes, sir.
Or do y'all have, I don't know this, so do y'all have policies in place to say, like, if you're on generator power, there's certain things you want to do, like surgeries, or is that just kind of dependent on the situation?
Facility by facility, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, a lot of times when you're on emergency power, there should be an immediate cease of elective because you're down to just one source now. You're not sitting there with surgery with dual sources. And if it transfers over and you're on emergency power for a period of time, surgery should stop. Elective, emergency, and whatever's going continue. That should be a hospital policy.
Okay, moving from NFPA to the Joint Commission. Anybody ever heard of those guys? The Joint Commission enterprise to enable and affirm the highest standards of healthcare quality and patient safety for all. It accredits more than 22,000 healthcare organizations and programs in the not just the United States, around the world. Again, the primary codes we're going to talk about is 101 and 99. Key points for the 96-hour rule under Joint Commission's origin. While it doesn't explicitly state strict requirements to have 96 hours of supplies on hand, the Joint Commission's emergency preparedness standards essentially mandate the hospitals plan for a 96-hour period of operation. Now, this did get published a lot more after the fiasco several years back where the hospitals were telling folks, you short of 96 hours, and started writing them up and citing them. Did anybody get cited for that? Surprised. Under the implementation, organizations like Iroquois, I think it took me a little while to figure that one out, Healthcare Organization and the Healthcare Association of New York State, these folks developed an incredible set of documents. This is a link for it. You can take a picture of that if you want, but we'll send you these slides. But I would highly recommend don't reinvent the wheel. Go to this and pull it up and you can adapt it. It's like a template for your facility. And when I started looking at New York as opposed to Georgia, I didn't see really very much that would make it anything that you would have a problem with. But it is a great set of documents, and I found that both DNV and the Joint Commission reference this thing because you can look and know that they've got cut and paste all over the things. Focus on planning. This is what I've been trying to get across. I think this is probably more important than anything we're talking about here today. Plan this stuff. Drill this stuff with your team. You know, we have 2 disaster drills a year at a minimum. That's required. You can have 3, add this one. But you want to test that plan you put together. And that could be easily a paper drill where you're going around to the supply chain looking at that. And, you know, she says, this is how much I got. Well, can you get some more? Yes, I just call these folks. Let's call them. See if that memorandum of understanding works. Take it as far as you want to take it. But at any point, you need to reference your emergency operations plan, your HVA. Everybody knows what HVA is. You should be planning for what those top things on your HCA is. I'm sure everybody in here, the top 5, one of them's got to be severe weather. And then your policies and procedures. Okay, EM 12.02.09, this is EP3. And it goes into a lot of detail. I won't read you all this, but it basically tells you the same thing, that the Joint Commission is saying, you know, you need to try to remain fully functional. You're not required to, but that's going to be your mark to try to get to 96 hours. See what your limitations are. Then decisions would include, but not be limited to, maintaining emergency services, progressive curtailment of activities, stopping elective surgeries. Tane was talking about transferring certain patients, and evacuation of the facility or returning to normal operations. returning to normal operations. Well, what would that? Well, problem's gone. You're still there. Everything's running. You can come off emergency power, and the hospital goes back to normal. That's the ideal one. Evacuate the facility. Terry back there. I mean, y'all heard a little bit. Was it yesterday, Terry? We were talking about it? Your plume. He's got this, and this is a chlorine gas. I mean, this is some bad stuff. And he has a picture of this huge cloud over his hospital. And I'm like, holy crap. And he thought, the first thing he thought of was the first thing I thought of. How good are my outside air dampers working? Because if I can seal this building off as much as possible, I can try to limit how much of this stuff comes in the building. And then who was it that told you you're going to have to evacuate?
I don't exactly remember. Thank God Terry Perry showed up.
But he gets a local authority person, says you're going to have to evacuate. I mean, can you imagine? And what Terry said, there's 11 or 9 ambulances within 40-mile radius.
What we found out, they showed up and said we did, and their evacuation line was actually the road in front of the hospital. So we were all discussing whether it's going to do it or not. So we started checking the processes, and Joey had all the ambulances tied up. And the EMS they were awesome. The guy found out about it. He showed up in the command center, and he gathered everything he had, and all he could pull was 11 ambulances. We had 141 patients.
That was the same day Joe was moving. wasn't
Same day Joe was moving.
it? I remember I saw that presentation too.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Perfect planning there. But yeah, Nicole's right. Evacuation is a bad word. But, we have to prepare for those things. We used to talk about you never do evacuation in a healthcare facility because you do horizontal relocation. You move from one smoke compartment to the next. We didn't think about a big plume outside the building.
Hey, Mark, we talk about it all the time. It's a good opportunity about relationships. I'm actually building PowerPoint specifically on relationships. We talked about yesterday getting to know somebody, walking around, introducing yourself to somebody you don't know today, leave with a new friend. The relationships that day proved just unreal godly as how. The real quick story on it, we were gathering ambulances. I had to call the state. Terry's operations center was running. Becky Prince is a state EMA person that controls all of them, EMS person. She called me because she knew I was there. That was a relationship. Becky felt, knew me wanted to go. And meanwhile, she had already called Chris Matson up at Show and said, "Where are you? How long have you done?" So that relationship, because we needed ambulances, by the time we got done and started the process, Chris up at Children's had asked all of the EMS guys and the helicopters, "Hey, we've got this going on, can you wait?" Some of the helicopters, of course, they couldn't continue to fly, so they had to change crews. Some of the EMS guys went and took a shower and got something to eat and sat there in the ambulance and said, "We're ready." That relationship had us on the way to us when we called it off. 65 ambulances and 3 helicopters. It's all about get to know your peers, folks.
How many of you, a couple times a year maybe, go down to the fire department that responds to your facility with some donuts, talk to guys? We have here, at least 3 times a year. We'll reach out to the...
I try to get them to come to lunch every year.
Yeah, and because those guys change, the staff changes, but we want them. The first time we have a big problem in one of our major facilities is not the first time I want these guys to walk in the building. I want them to walk in and walk around and say, "Okay, this is here, here's where the stairwells are." And you got drawings, you got evacuation plans, but there's nothing like going through that facility. And those guys are really appreciative. I mean, they are. They're just like, I'll just tell a little short thing. We had, this is at Midtown Medical Center. We're about 1 million plus square feet. And I had been there 2 months maybe. And I was sitting at my desk and fire alarm goes off. And I'm thinking, they didn't tell me they was going to have a drill. They always tell me when we're going to have a drill, just so I don't have to worry about anything. And I heard kitchen and I thought, I think I might walk down there. So I got up, walked down the hallway, and I got the kitchen from my office is probably 4 times this length of this room. I got about 1 times the length, and I started smelling smoke. Then I got to a jog. And when I came around the corner, kitchen door is on an automatic door. And when it opens, the smoke was so dense, I couldn't see 5 feet in the room. But I can hear one of my guys hollering, everybody out of here, everybody out of here. So I get down there, and I can see flames, and they're roaring flames. And I start screaming for everybody to get out, and he leads the guy. He says, I think everybody's out. I think everybody's out. So I said, well, you get out of here. So he gets out, and he says, there's a gas line that's on fire. So I said, well, did y'all pull the hood? He said, we did. It didn't stop it. So I asked the guy that was with me, I says, do you know where the main gas line is to the hospital? He said, yes, sir. I said, let's go. So we ran out to the main gas line. And I start turning it off. He said, hold on. You turn that off? You gonna cut my boilers off? I said, dude, this building's on fire. I don't care what we cut off. So we got the gas cut off, and I walked back. Of course, I'm, huffing and puffing. He's huffing and puffing. Lee, bless his heart, the guy that was responded first, he's got smoke inhalation. He's in pretty bad shape. And I look up, and of course, the kitchen's on what we call the first floor. Then you got the second floor, and the third floor, I see flames shooting out of the roof. Well, I'm like, oh my God, that's 3 floors. So all the guys are running out. I said, be sure, go tell them this is not a drill. You got to leave your department. Well, as it so happened, the hood system, which was very large at this hospital, came up, went to a wall, went down, went under the slab, came back up into a chase, and discharged on a big fan on the 3rd floor roof. So that was just that flame in that duct and discharging out of that fan. It was all contained inside the ductwork. I didn't know that at the time, but I felt a whole lot better. But my reason for this story was, we talked to the fire department, but he said, the guy, battalion chief, he says, we get a call, Midtown Medical Center, and it's kind of not really a joke, but like, well, I wonder who burnt popcorn in the microwave this time. And they get on the truck, and they're driving and talking. And he says, we came around that corner of 10th Avenue, and we're standing there looking at the biggest building in Columbus with all these patients in it and flames shooting out of the 3rd floor roof. He said, if I dropped my toothpick, you would have heard it. Mm-hmm. So there again, you don't want those guys coming the first time walking in that building. Get them familiar with your buildings. Craig, you want to say anything to that?
A lot is going through my mind. So, I've been in this almost 30 years. And that's not counting the 9 years in the sprinkler side. So, just all transparency here. Hospitals are a problem when it comes to kitchens because oftentimes they run 24 hours a day. It's challenging on maintenance. It's challenging on getting the suppression system people in there to do their required 6 months testing and inspections. That design you just described was that was predictable. And how that got through that initial design and plan review process, ductwork like that should be finding its most direct path out of the building. You transition downward and horizontally, you can predict that you're going to have grease accumulation. Mm-hmm. So and now you're so heavily dependent on doing something you really don't like doing, which is putting a hole into a rated assembly so that you can get in there and clean it. And what happens is when that cleaning occurs, it is really, really hard on the people doing that to be disciplined about putting those access panels back in place, putting the insulation back in place, so because they know in a few months they're going to have to come back here and do it again. And if you've ever looked at those, how oftentimes do you see grease leaking out from around those access places? And then are they located where the code says where they're supposed to be, basically within arm's reach of every change or transition in elevation or direction? Because why? Because that's where the grease accumulates, and somebody's got to reach in there and clean that stuff out. So and so as you were describing this, I was just thinking of one domino after the other, or as sometimes people say, when all the holes in the Swiss cheese line up, and that's when planes fall out of the sky and ships sink and hospitals catch on fire. So yeah, that was just as you were telling that story, I was just thinking, wow, what happened here, what happened there, and by the grace of God, this didn't turn out to be something more catastrophic.
Oh, it was amazing. Of course, the response was so well. And the building was built in '79. That system was put in '79. The reason when they pulled the hood that it didn't extinguish the flames and cut the gas off is because they pulled the wrong hood. They had hood 1 and 2, and the lady that was there went and pulled it. Well, when that thing discharges, now you can't see because of the powder. So their assumption, my guy's assumption was, well, hell, they already pulled the hood. So after, like I said, I'd been there 2 months. After that, we had the red hood that was A and the blue hood that was B. And at every door, I got a blue B and a red A. And if you can't read, you can still figure out a color. And so it just made it so simple, but it was a little bit convoluted and confusing.
The automatic function should have happened. I mean,
Yeah.
there's fusible links in there in the event that somebody doesn't or somebody can't pull the manual pull. I mean, so again, this is one of those, for whatever reason, all of those holes lined up led to that, that event.
I will say, the next month, the parking lot flooded, and we had 7 cars float out of the parking lot. My second month there, my COO comes walking out, and he says, well, they say everything comes in threes, and I'm thinking, what have I done? I've taken this job. Okay, get back on track. I got a little ahead of myself when I was talking about the drills, but obviously even the Joint Commission says, test drills and validate to adjust your sustainability plan, because it's a living, breathing document. You always have to make changes. Another example, Tane kind of brought this up, a hospital with a 72-hour supply of potable water at full capacity, consideration of reducing patient load by early discharge and halting elective procedures could reduce water demand by approximately 50%, thereby extending the hospital's potable water supply to 96 hours. That's just one example. Tends to have it to stretch out, and then you'd have that memorandum of understanding.
Hey Mike, what's a 72-hour supply of potable water look like in storage? I mean, that'd be wow. We use 200,000 gallons of water a day. I know y'all use more than that.
Yeah, we've got a couple of facilities that have tanks, but not very many. Now, of course, we've been running into some things. I love this stuff. We could talk about this stuff forever, but I mentioned yesterday about the how lucky it is to have a well at some hospitals just to feed your towers and your boilers. But, we lost water in 2 different hospitals, and we had 1 feed. They're older buildings, and they only had 1 feed. Today, of course, I think it's a requirement, Mark, that you have 2 separate feeds, but we do that. We have, on all of our new construction, is N+1. We have chill water on emergency power. So, things are a lot different than they were back when a lot of these buildings came about. Okay, we'll move now to CMS. CMS is a federal agency that provides health coverage to more than 160 million through Medicare, Medicaid, Children's Health Services Program. CMS works in partnership with the entire healthcare community to improve quality and equity of outcomes from healthcare systems. CMS grants deemed authority to approved accrediting agencies like the Joint Commission and DNV. This means that agency has the power to confirm that the institution meets Medicare and Medicaid qualifications for requirements. Sure, everybody knows what CMS does. Okay, under CMS, they have a quality, safety, and oversight group, which is where their emergency preparedness for every emergency is in their documents. Now, I thought this was hilarious, but this is right out of CMS. Emergency response plan in a red binder, not blue binder, on a desk, not on a shelf, to enable all these folks to respond in an emergency, timely, collaborative, organized, in an effective manner. Pretty straightforward. Now, can you put it in a blue binder? Of course you can, but I just thought that was kind of comical, so I had to put it in there that way. Might be a big binder. CMS, Quality Safety Oversight Group, which is the QSOG, has developed a site to provide useful information to CMS Central, the regional offices, state survey offices, the SAs, all these other places, tribal, regional, local emergency management partners and healthcare providers for developing effective and robust emergency management plans. This site is updated very regularly. I went back and it's like every 6 months, which is kind of amazing to me. CMS.gov website provides information and tools utilizing an all hazards approach, and that includes things like the pandemic flu, hurricanes, tornadoes, fires, earthquakes, power outages, chemical spills, and so forth. The website provides one-stop shopping to obtain both mandated and voluntary emergency preparedness information and tools. It is regularly updated, gives clarifying roles. This was kind of interesting down here, and responsibilities for all actions, and you can look at different protocols and give you at least a basis for looking at it. Effective emergency management across all healthcare providers types to ensure well-being of vulnerable populations, where the long-term facilities, acute care, community-based facilities during a disruptive event. Now this one was really fun. I did elaborate on this a little more because Piedmont was DMV and this was for my accrediting folks. But Clint's the guy I was with, and Clint likes to talk and he likes to type. So I told him I just need a little information on how they saw things, and Clint don't give a little information. But DMV survey approach is collaborative, adaptable, and focuses on helping organizations improve continually year over year. They come once a year. The result is consistency better care experiences for the patients and peace of mind for the families. DMV surveyors have worked in hospitals and have seen the survey process from your perspective. Their experiences have shaped our beliefs around accreditation. Quality of care is always a high priority. Every organization is unique on how they meet the standards and the requirements. They are very well about not telling you this is what you must do. They say, here's the standard, how are you going to meet it? And Joint Commission says they do that, but it's not as straightforward. Effective survey process, nonconformities are an opportunity to improve and not a penalty. And that is true. And then collaboration builds trust. So you'll get a nonconformity and you work on that for the next year. Your IP folks, not your IP folks, your accrediting folks will put you a plan out there and you'll work toward this plan to meet, so that you've solved it. And when you have your next survey, they come in and that's the first thing they do is look at those and they wipe them off. DMV, in a nutshell, all they say is they want you to comply with an FP 99, Chapter 2012 edition, Chapter 12, which is what we talked about earlier. Contained in Chapter 12 is a requirement for organizations to maintain the current documentation of inventory assets, resources extending out for a period of at least 96 hours. Shortfalls of assets and resources extending out. Particular resource or asset cannot be maintained for an entire 96-hour period. The organization needs to identify mitigations, if feasible, in an attempt to reach 96 hours. Example, fuel oil delivery. So if you have 60 hours of fuel, do you have an MOU in place at about 48 hours to start bringing fuel to your hospital? Okay, that's probably not a big issue, but what if it was a hurricane and all the streets are blocked? Power lines and trees. I can tell you all about that in Augusta. And of course, I'm not trying to throw fear out there, but I know y'all have thought about these things. Organization needs to identify at what point evacuation, full or partial, may be necessary if there's lack of adequate resources or assets. What'd you say, Terry?
Well, I was thinking Terry. But you're not Terry. I want to mention one thing. Sam was up here earlier. Certain things might dictate skipping all of this and getting the hell out of Dodge, such as him being able to get off that island because he knows that the flood's coming in and it's going to block the bridge. Because you can't wait till you're in the middle of this. You see what I'm saying, on the 96 hour. So that one right there comes to my mind thinking, well, maybe if there's some other emergency, that's fine, but when you know that it's gonna block your path to get off that island, that's the thing where I think you just drop and run, Just to look at your HVA and make sure what the effect is on your road.
Thank you, team. Under DMV, for the key points, they look at PE6, which is fiscal environment under the DMV. And then under SR2, it's going to give you, at a minimum, policy and procedures shall address the following. Need for staff and patients, whether the evacuate or shelter in place, are included but not limited to food, water, medical, and pharmaceutical supplies, alternate sources of energy to maintain the following: temperatures to protect patients' health and safety for safe and sanitary storage, emergency lighting, fire detection, extinguishing and alarms, sewage and waste disposal. It further goes into SR5, the organization will implement emergency and standby power systems based on the emergency plan set forth. This again refers back to your policies and procedures. The organization shall develop policies and procedures based on its emergency plan, HVA, and communications plan. At a minimum, the policies and procedures should address the following provisions of substance and resource needs for patients and staff, whether they evacuate or shelter in place, to include but not be limited to, and list those again. DMV is really good about listing things 3 or 4 times. I'd like to apologize, y'all, for the temperature in here, but when they found out I was talking and they tried to keep you awake, I guess. Organizations shall conduct a sustainability assessment to determine, where you're at. Like I said, this seems like it's repeating. And I'm sorry I'm reading a lot of this, but I know you folks can't see it back there. The resources of information completing a 96-hour assessment include, but are not limited to, American Society of Healthcare Engineering's Iroquois Healthcare Organization. That's the New York one that I'd referred to earlier. Note that some states do set minimum requirements for some provisions of such as food, water, and alternate services of energy to maintain. Joint Commission didn't come up with this. CMS hadn't brought this up. But DMV is saying temperatures to protect patients and safety for proper storage and provisions of food, medical supplies, pharmaceuticals, emergency lighting, fire protection, extinguishing alarm system, sewage and waste disposal. This is, some states set minimum requirements. I mean, you have to have a certain amount of food. Certain states. Does Georgia? I can't find it anywhere.
And Mark, does that mean that the temperatures, that means HVAC on emergency power?
No. Comfortable. This just says comfortable. So, and if you can't maintain it comfortable, then you got to evacuate or move them.
Like June, July, it's 95
Right.
degrees in the room.
Not too good.
We have had some long-term care centers that's gotten tags for not having 96-hour food and water.
For not having it, or not having a plan. Yeah, see, that shouldn't be cited for that. No. Unless you're under a different organization than any of these. And I would imagine that's under CMS, so they don't even have to refer to it. Now, CMS does observe NFPA, which is where the standard is.
We used to always keep 3 days worth of food and water, and then 3 years ago, Joint Commission come around and started making us keep 96 hours.
That's over there.
Yeah,
That's a problem with surveyors.
I got a good slide for that too. Yeah, save that for when we get to my next. I don't know if it's the next one, but I have one. But now you got some ammunition. This is, and you have to determine, are they just recommending something, or are they fixing to write you up? If they're just recommending something, sure, I'll take that in consideration. Yep. But if he's fixing to write it down, that's time to go fight. So, that's me. I mean, obviously you do it how you want to do it. This just still continues about organizations are not required to heat and cool the entire building. Where did Tane go? He just left. There you go. Organizations are not required to heat and cool the entire building evenly, but shall ensure safe temperatures, and that's where safe temperatures are maintained in those areas deemed necessary to protect patients, other people who are in the facility, and for provisions of the storage, all your supplies and things like that. If you can't do it, you have to select either evacuate or relocate. Because in your ORs, you're going to have air circulation. Some of your floors, you may not have air circulation. Of course, if you're 96 degrees outside, you're circulating 96 degree air. Okay. What do surveyors say? How do surveyors know everything? I want to know how I like this one. Let's see. That's what I do. I fix stuff and I know things. You cannot store anything under a sink. Who says that? Joint Commission? Is this a true statement? You can't.
Make it a policy.
You can't answer. You know. I'm just kidding. That's a GO standard. Never been anything written that says you can't do it. But people, they would open up under a sink, and there'd be clean supplies in there, and the P-trap leak. That's a problem. You don't store clean supplies under a sink, but it's a storage area. And for God's sake, don't screw the door shut, because nobody's going to go back and check it for 5 years, and then when you do take the screws out, it's been rotted under there because it leaked. You must have an exit sign in all directions when you walk out into the corridor. Well, you have a sign in the exit direction. But you'll be surprised. I mean, in all these, not me, I have been wrote up, but me or somebody on my team. And of course, they were all erased, but this was great. All the exterior doors must be fire rated. Because by God, you don't want that fire going outside. And he didn't really say that, but he walked out, he exited the outside door, and he's looking, well, this is a steel door, but it's not rated. No, sir. This should be rated. I don't think so. This is outside. Ceiling tiles cannot be scarred or cracked. That's not true. 1/8 inch gap can't be more than an 1/8 inch. It's got a scratch or it's scarred. Now it can't be soiled with the black mold stuff. Sure.
Even our group up there, they need to know.
Yeah, I mean, patient room doors must be self-closing. There is a little asterisk there, and that's because if it's an isolation room, patient room door, then it has to have a closed room. Doors that could be confused with exit doors should be labeled not an exit. Is that true?
That one's true, isn't it?
What's wrong with this statement? Terry, you shut up.
I know what it is.
You shut up too.
Not any.
No exit. $500 gift card for that man.
But specifically 2-inch letters, 3/8 inch stroke.
2-inch letters. Well, 1-inch letters on not in and exits 2-inch letters, and it's a 3/8 inch stroke. And that is NFPA, and there's a picture of it. And my argument was, of course, I didn't put it there, but when I went in this facility, there was 1,000 of these not an exit signs. And my argument was, we walk up, and it says not an exit. Well, that's not an exit. Mm-hmm. She says, but this code says it's got to say no exit. And I said, but that would mean there's no exit. Right. And I didn't win it. So, but yeah, you can't have not an exit. And trust me, a certain surveyor can write you up. I think it is bad that they would, but it is not code. So what do we remember? 96-hour rule originated from NFPA 99, Chapter 12. You must have a sustainability assessment to determine your available resources trying to reach a 96-hour goal. If required, resource cannot be maintained for 96 hours. Identify mitigations if feasible. I didn't put that in there. To reach 96, I did. To reach 96 hours if feasible. Sometimes it's just not. So that will be your shortcoming. Still doesn't mean you got to close or evacuate. You just got to figure out what you're going to do with that one thing. Organizations need to identify at what point selective relocation or evacuation may be necessary. So what I'm saying is identify your shortcomings. Let's see. This is just my references, because I was told that you have to give credit where credit's due. Does anybody have any questions?
Good presentation.
Thank you.
Good.